بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم، وأكرمنا بنور الفهم، وافتح علينا بمعرفة العلم، وسهل أخلاقنا بالحلم، واجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. Today, inshallah, we're going to start lesson 2 with a question. How did philosophy originate? And in this lesson, we have two main topics we're going to talk about. The first topic is we're going to talk about the European narrative about the origin of philosophy. And topic two is the actual historical emergence of philosophy. So we have a European narrative, and we have the actual historical emergence of philosophy. Those are the main topics we're going to talk about. Let's start with the European narrative of the origin of philosophy. Um, some European historians present the birth of philosophy in a rather dramatic way, as the Moroccan historian of philosophy, Dr. Tayyib Bouazza, describes their narrative. He said, describing their narrative, suddenly and without any preparation, the philosophical logos is born. There are no signs of pregnancy, no gradual development. One day, in the 6th century BCE, on the shores of the city of Miletus, philosophy emerged out of nothing, appearing almost miraculously. This narrative, however, reflects a clear sense of intellectual arrogance, as it overlooks a long history of human thought and human philosophical thoughts that preceded the Greeks. Um, in I want to share screen to see together uh, this narrative. Let's 1 second. Let me share screen. Bismillah. Okay. Yeah. So we have a claim. So the claim is the philosophical logos emerged suddenly without any thoughts before this philosophy. Okay, so out of nothing, in the shores of Miletus in Greece, we found out the human being uh, are philosophicals. Um, and this is the European narrative. Um, in reality, the Greeks were preceded by great civilizations that had already developed a sophisticated traditions of thought and science and culture, such as Egyptian, uh, Chinese, and Phoenician civilizations. So before Greece, before the civilization of Greeks, we had an ancient Eastern civilizations. Moreover, the Indian civilization was developing a philosophical ideas at roughly the same time of the as the Greek. Um, so Dr. Yusuf Karam, the historian of philosophy, the famous historian of philosophy, explains this point clearly. He said, the human intellect has always been essentially the same throughout history. The Eastern civilizations used reason long before the Greeks. They developed industries, sciences, and arts, and transmitted many of these achievements to Greece, saving the Greeks the effort and time required to discover these philosophical these things independently. So beyond practical sciences and arts, ancient Eastern civilizations also produced religious narratives and reflections on life and the universe that can genuinely be described as philosophical. So if we looked deeply to the resources of these civilizations, we're going to find that they reflected on fundamental questions, fundamental philosophical questions, such as the nature of existence, uh, change and permanence, good and evil, the origin and destiny of the world. So within those traditions, we find ideas such as monotheism, polytheism, the Persian dualistic worldview, and the Indian doctrine of the unity of existence. Later, philosophical developments didn't go beyond these major themes. In fact, many Greek philosophical ideas can be traced back to earlier Eastern influences. So this is the European narrative of emergence of philosophy, and the comment for Dr. Yusuf Karam and Dr. Tayyib Bouazza. But the question now is, um, what is the actual historical emergence of philosophy? This is topic two. Um, although earlier civilizations possessed philosophical ideas, um, the first systematically recorded philosophical tradition in the form familiar to us today appeared among the Greeks. Um, the earliest philosopher recorded in human history is generally considered to be Thales. We call him in Arabic Talis. And it is important not to confuse him with Aristotle. Aristotle, whose name in Arabic philosophical texts is often rendered Aristoteles. So we have Thales and Aristoteles, Thales and Aristotle. Thales, Thales lived much earlier than Aristotle. But before the first philosopher appeared, what was the historical context? In order to answer this question, we have to look at different directions. Let's start with the historical background of Greek civilization. The ancient Greeks were not originally native to the lands they later inhabited. Historical evidence suggests that they migrated from Asia, belonging to Indo-European groups, sometimes described as Aryan peoples, Al-Ariyin. They refer to the earlier inhabitants of the lands as the uh, Jains, while they call themselves the migrated people. They call themselves the Hellenes. So Greek society consisted of several major tribes with distinct dialect and culture features. So we have the Iolians or Aeolians and the Dorians and Achaeans and the Ionians. Over time, migrations and conflict between these groups led to significant culture mixing. um, During the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, many Greek cities experienced internal conflicts between uh, aristocratic rulers and the general population. In cities such as Athens and Sparta, these conflicts eventually contributed to the development of early democratic institutions. In other cities, however, political instability forced many people to migrate. Some um, some moved um, northward into regions of the Balkans, while others settled in places such as southern Italy, Sicily, and southern France. As a result, the Greek world became a network of independent city states and colonies spread along the Mediterranean. Despite their political independence, these cities shared a common language, religion, and cultural identity. They worshipped the same gods. They worshipped Zeus, or they call it Zeus, and gathered periodically for religious festivals and athletic competitions. During these festivals, wars were temporarily suspended, and people from different cities met to exchange ideas, goods, and artistic creations. Um, this continuous interaction between cities played a major role in the development and maturation of Greek civilization. Um, at this stage, Greek religious beliefs were strongly anthropomorphic. Yeah, the Greeks believed in many gods rather than a single deity. These gods were thought to live on the summit of Mount Olympus, and they were imagined in a human form. So, according to myth, the gods possessed extraordinary strength and speed, and a special divine substance flowed through their veins, granting them immortality. They lived in a magnificent palaces in heaven and enjoyed a life of eternal comfort. Yet they were far from morally perfect. They fought among themselves, interfered in human conflicts, and even took sides in legendary wars, such as the War of Trojan, Harb Turwada. So, such mythological conceptions of the divine eventually stimulated deeper philosophical reflection about the nature of reality and the cosmos. The Greeks were not isolated from the rest of the ancient world. Archaeological discoveries show clear evidence of intellectual exchange. For example, golden tablets discovered in southern Italy contains instructions for the soul's journey after death, resembling passages from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Similarly, Greek thinkers adopted certain religious ideas, such as the doctrine of reincarnation from Indian traditions. Um, but still, where we can find the beginning of the Greek philosophy, we didn't answer this question yet. We need to know, when did the philosophy emerge in Greece? We can say that by the 7th century BCE, a group of thinkers, thinkers known as the Seven Sages had become famous in Greece. The first of these sages was Thales, the philosopher we talked about, who's generally regarded as the starting point of Greek philosophy. Um, Greek philosophy is usually divided into three major stages. Um, the formative stage and the classical or mature stage, and the later or the declining stage. Let's talk about the formative stage. The earliest stage is commonly called the pre-Socratic period. And this period beginning with Thales. During this period, the central philosophical question was, what is the fundamental principle of the universe? In other words, what are things ultimately made of? Or how do change and transformation occur in nature? For example, when wood turns into ash, has the substance itself changed, or has it simply moved from one state to another? Similarly, when food becomes part of the human body, does the underlying matter transform entirely, or does the same substance persist while its form changed? Greek thinkers offer different answers to these questions. Three major philosophical approaches emerged. Um, we have three major philosophical directions in this era, in this period, the pre-Socratic period. We have the Ionian direction, the Ionian school. We have the Pythagorean school, and we have the Eleatic school. Let's talk about the Ionian direction. As you can see in this slide, the Ionian philosophers believed that all things are composed of single underlying substance, which undergoes change and transformation. Their task was to identify that fundamental substance, The Pythagorean school, or the Pythagoreans, focused not on material substance, but on mathematical structure. They believed that the order of the universe could best be explained through numbers and mathematical relationships. And we have the Eleatic school, the Eleatic philosophers. The Eleatic philosophers rejected the very idea of a change. They argued that change involves a logical contradiction. How's that? They say that since it implies something um, coming from nothing or turning into nothing, that's the logical contradiction. Therefore, they concluded that true reality must be unchanging and permanent. Uh, this is the overview of the three directions. But if we need to go deeper inside each direction, inside each school. So let's go deeper in the Ionian school and the birth of, let's say, natural philosophy. Look, the Ionians, in the Ionian era, we can consider this era as the birth of natural science. And the Pythagorean, they took the lead to emergence of the mathematical philosophy, and the Eleatic, they were the pioneer for emerging the metaphysics. So we have physics, we have so the Ionians focused on physics and natural sciences. The Pythagoreans focused on mathematics, and the Eleatic school focused on metaphysics. Let's start with Thales. Thales is traditionally regarded as the first philosopher, or the first of the seven sages of Greece. Um, so he considered as the earliest philosopher to devote himself primarily to the study of nature. We know that Thales traveled to Egypt and studied in its temples, where he encountered advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. In answering the fundamental philosophical question about the origin of the physical world, Thales proposed that water is the first principle and the underlying substance from which all things arise. He called it archi. And then we have Anaximander. Anaximander was a student of Thales, but he disagreed with his teacher's explanation of the origin of the cosmos. He argued that water cannot serve as the ultimate first principle. Why? Because a determinate element cannot generate its opposite. Instead, he proposed that the primary substance of the universe is the apeiron, the infinite or the boundless. Um, the principle is infinite in two senses, qualitatively and quantitatively. Qualitatively, because it can assume any form or determination, and quantitatively, because it's limitless and inexhaustible. After Anaximander, we have Anaximenes. Anaximenes, he is a student of Anaximander, and he returned to more concrete explanation of the first principle. He believed that the primary substance must be um, perceptible and homogeneous element, similar to Thales' approach. However, instead of water, he proposed air. He proposed air as the fundamental substance of reality. Air, according to him, is infinite and all encompassing, surrounding the cosmos and sustaining the earth. Um, and then we have Heraclitus or Heraclitus. Heraclitus proposed that fire is the fundamental principle from which all things arise. He is most famous for his doctrine that everything is in constant flux. His doctrine is famous. He said that everything is in constant flux. Everything is in constant flux. His well-known statement expressed this idea clearly. He said, "You cannot step into the same river twice. You cannot step into the same river twice." How's that? It means that since the river is always flowing, the water you step into the second time is different from the water you stepped into before at the first time. Likewise, the person himself stepping into the river is also constantly changing. Heraclitus also advanced a form of unity of existence, وحدة الوجود. Um, However, he suggested that the multiplicity of things is ultimately different manifestations of a single underlying reality, symbolized by fire. So, Thales, he said water. Anaximander, he said the Apiron. Um, and then Anaximenes, he said air. And then Heraclitus, he said the fire. Fire and flux, yeah. And then the Pythagorean school. What about them? We know that the founder of this school was Pythagoras, the famous mathematician, and he is considered as philosopher also. Uh, Unfortunately, very little of the original philosophical writings of the Pythagoreans has survived because their school followed a strict tradition of intellectual secrecy, similar to the priestly traditions of ancient Egypt. It is even reported that one student was punished and sent to death for revealing a mathematical discovery outside the school. However, we can say that the Pythagoreans believed that the structure of reality is fundamentally mathematical. According to them, the universe resembles a world of numbers rather than a world of material elements like water or fire. They argued that the principles of numbers are the principles of all beings, or more radically, things themselves are numbers. And the cosmos is ultimately a harmonious order of number and proportion. Um, And then the Eleatic school, the Eleatic school and the emergence of metaphysics. Um, the true founder of this school was Parmenides. Although Xenophanes preceded him and articulated some of the early ideas that later shaped the doctrine of Eleatic school. The Eleatic philosophers argued that truth is accessible through reason and rational principles, while sense perception, matter, and empirical observation led only to opinion. However, truth is accessible through reason and rational principles. They therefore maintain that reality is fundamentally unchanging, and they denied the genuine existence of motion and change in the ultimate sense. This school marks one of the earliest philosophical attempts to investigate metaphysics, the study of being qua being, or the study of being as such. So this is the period of pre-Socratic period. This is the pre-Socratic period. Now let's move to the period of maturity. Um, yeah, this is a comparison between the three schools and the pre-Socratic period. The Ionians, they focused on natural sciences, and core principle was water, air, fire, and Apiron. And yeah, that's like a summary of what we explained. Then let's go to the second period, the period of philosophical maturity. This period is characterized by an intense intellectual conflict between two opposing tendencies. On one side stood the sophists such as Protagoras and Gorgias. On the other side were the three great philosophers of classical Greece: Socrates, his student Plato, and Plato's student Aristotle, Socrates, Aflaton, and Aristotle. The Greek word sophist, sophist originally meant a wise man or a teacher, especially a teacher of um, a teacher of rhetoric and eloquence. A democracy flourished in Greece, and political success increasingly depended on the ability to pursue large audiences. So the democracy was a very important rule that or the very important factor that made sophists appeared. Okay, how's that? The politicians needed a powerful speech to influence the public. Okay, and lawyers needed a persuasive arguments to win cases in court. In this context, the sophists emerged as professional teachers who trained young men, particularly wealthy youth, in uh, rhetoric, argumentation, and debate. They enabled them to gain political influence and defend their claims. However, the sophists were often criticized for using clever arguments and rhetorical tricks rather than seeking truth. They sometimes prided themselves on the ability to defend both a claim and its opposite with equal skill. This intellectual attitude eventually led them towards skepticism and relativism, undermining traditional beliefs about truth, religion, and morality. Um, if we go inside famous sophists such as Protagoras, Protagoras in his work, it's called On Truth, um, he famously stated, "Man is the measure of all things." By this, he meant that truth is relative to the individual. What appears true to one person is true for that person, even if it appears false to someone else. And Gorgias, in his work on non-being, he explains a very advanced and extreme skeptical position, summarized in three propositions. The proposition one, nothing exists. Proposition two, even if something exists, it cannot be known by human beings. Proposition three, even if it could be known, it could not be communicated to others. As a result, we saw the three titans or the three great philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates emerged as a powerful critic of sophistic thought. Through his method of questioning and dialogue, he challenged their relativism and restored confidence in rational inquiry and logical argument. He challenged their relativism, skepticism, nihilism. And his student, Plato developed these ideas further, constructing one of the most influential philosophical systems in history. Later um, came Aristotle. Aristotle is Plato's student. Aristotle played a decisive role in systematizing the principles of correct reasoning. His work eventually became known as Aristotelian logic, which remained the dominant framework for logical thought for many centuries. This was uh, uh, the maturity period. So, as we mentioned, we have three periods: the emergence of philosophy, the pre-Socratic period, and the maturity period, and then the declining period. Let's talk about the declining period. Okay, this is This is a comparison between the Sophists and the Titans, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In this slide, you can see that the core value of Sophists is subjective truth. However, here, and the philosopher is the objective universal truth. And here, the motivation driven by profit, here, the motivation driven by wisdom and seeking truth. The methodology here was weaponized rhetoric and persuasion. However, here, the methodology is logic, logical deduction, and yeah, here, the ultimate end is skepticism, nihilism, relativism. However, here, the ultimate end is the foundations of epistemology and belief. And then let's go to uh, the period of declining. So, after the towering achievements of Plato and Aristotle, Greek philosophy entered a period that produced fewer original contributions to theories of knowledge, epistemology, and being, metaphysics. And instead, philosophical schools increasingly focused on ethics and practical philosophy, leading to the emergence of schools such as Epicureanism and Stoicism, الأبيقورية والرواقية. Among the most influential movements of this period was New Platonism, a philosophical revival and reinterpretation of Plato's thought. Its importance lies in the fact that some of its ideas later entered Islamic philosophy. The philosopher Plotinus, wrote a work known as التاسعات, or the Enneads, التاسعات, which was translated into Arabic later. Early Muslim philosophers initially believed these writings to be works of Aristotle. However, Ibn Sina later corrected this misunderstanding. Eventually, Athens ceased to be the central marketplace for intellectual life. Scholars and thinkers migrated to Alexandria in Egypt, where a vibrant center of learning emerged. Alexandria remained a major hub for philosophy and science until the 4th century CE. However, after the Roman emperor embraced Christianity and began promoting church doctrine as the official ideology of the state, the intellectual climate gradually changed. Finally, the Byzantine emperor, his name is Justinian, ordered the closure of philosophical schools in Athens and Alexandria. Then many philosophers, many scholars fled in fear for their lives and seeking refuge in other regions. They traveled to Persia. That's why we can find philosophy, the Islamic philosophy, or the Islamic philosophy was flourished first in Persia. First, actually, in Alexandria, and then moved to uh, uh, Persia. Within this event, or with this event, um, the classical tradition of Greek philosophy effectively came to an end under Roman ruler. This is lesson 2. In lesson 3, inshallah, we're going to answer another question, which is how did philosophy originate in Islamic world? This question, the question, today's lesson, we answer the question of how did philosophy originate in general? And that's why we talked about Greece. But we need to know how did philosophy originate in Islamic world. This, inshallah, will be answered next lesson, inshallah. Thank you for listening. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.